All right, let's record another little West Marches session prep. Ignore the baby belly. Also, it's Pokemon Day, so I'm wearing a Pokemon shirt when I'm recording this, at least. So anyway, I have my notes here. So we're going to talk about Green Recon Part 2. So last session prep video that I did, you guys got to dive into the preparations for the first part. This is the second part of that, and I've structured it a little differently based on feedback from some of you guys, so thank you for that. And I'm just gonna kind of dive into this. So we're gonna kind of talk about several different things. So first, I'm gonna timestamp this at the bottom as well. But first we're gonna talk about just general setup, you know, the Foundry map and all that, which technically happened last time I prepped. I didn't really have to do all of that for this session. Then we're gonna talk about how I actually fight the anxiety of being a GM, right? So how I prepared for the different outcomes I was expecting, what kind of outcomes I was expecting, that kind of thing. We'll talk about what actually happened. And then of course we'll talk about the things that I could have done better, right? Because there's always things I feel like I could have done better. So in general, this session prep, this round of session prepping took me about 4 hours, but 2 of those hours were pretty much for stuff that never even got touched for this, because again, anxious DM, so I over prep a lot of things. There was a possibility, and we'll get to that. So really, it only took me about 2 hours to prep for this session, mostly because last session, or last time I did prep, I prepped a lot for that session and we didn't hit it all. So I didn't have to do as much legwork, which is always a plus of being an anxious DM, is that you over prepare and then you have more content for later. So, you know, there's some pluses to being me, I guess. Right now, you can watch the actual play of Green Recon Part 2. I'll put a link down below. I offer it for free to free members of my Patreon. That means you don't have to subscribe necessarily, but it is all uncut, unfiltered, just like literally posted as soon as I have it rendered, and that's it. So if that's something you want to see the actual gameplay of this game and how it actually went, and some of my in-game improvisation, etc., go watch it. There's pretty much every game that I've run for the last year, my West Marches, is on there. Almost all of them, at least. Some of them, the files were messed up. But anyway, so let's talk about setting it up. So last time is when I really did this setup stuff. They ended at the camp in the Standing Stones, right? So they did not get to the actual Goblin camp. So it was prepared last time. It already had enemies placed on it. I don't know if I even mentioned this in the first prep video, but I ended up putting massive amounts of goblins on this map, bunch in tents, bunch in buildings, because this is supposed to be like a fortified location, stronghold of goblins, right? So I wanted their first impression of it to be like, oh crap, this place is overwhelming, right? On top of that, up until this point, remember in that first session, they encountered a whole bunch of traps on a trapped bridge. They also had traps even at this camp that they're spending the night at. So I wanted to make sure we reiterate the scrappiness of the goblins by including traps here as well, because this is their stronghold, so they would have traps around it as well. The map itself came from Birdie Maps, and I did edit it slightly because, again, this needed to be like a lakeside camp. So what I did was I actually blocked off part of it where there's this river to kind of almost make it look like it kept going. I do that a lot in an attempt to use maps without having to recreate like whole maps. I just try to find ones that work and then edit them, because that saves me a lot of time. Don't get me wrong, I love making maps, but I can't make 5 maps for one session, and I don't always have the time to make that many maps. So unless I have a very specific vision, I tend to try to find maps first. I actually use the drawing tool on Foundry to denote where the traps were, and kept in my notes what the DCs were, what kind of damage those things would do. I really just reused the traps that I used in the first 2 maps from the last session, so I didn't have to think super hard on them. I just like placed more. But on top of that, I also added loot. I always like to put random loot or items on the maps, because I found that when you do have a map, especially on Foundry, players like to explore every inch of it. And I like to reward that because I want you to use the map as much as as it took me to make it or whatever. And I also, it's just kind of a thing, right? So even in video games, typically you have to go right. So before you go right, you always go left to see if there is anything on the other direction. And usually the game devs reward you. It's kind of what I'm doing with this. So I did put a bunch of just random items, potions, magic items. But one thing in particular was there was this abandoned building and I wanted there to be lore in there. Because how in the hell did these goblins figure out that there was anything in the water, right? Because right now it's cursed, it's in swampy, and has a big beastie in it that keeps eating them. So how would they have found out that there is an artifact down there? Sure, those Watchful Stones, the Hill of Watchful Stones, had a little bit of lore there too, but do goblins care about lore that much? Maybe not. But they would scrounge around in an abandoned building for scrap metal, for scrap wood, for materials in that building. I ended up putting a book that kind of talks more in depth about kind of the lore and legends in this area. Finally, I added this thing. This is why I always find it important to review my characters, like who's going to be here. Now, obviously, if you have a regular campaign, you kind of get a sense of what their backstory is and what is important to them as you go throughout the campaign. But because this is a part of a West Marches and there are 80, 90 characters, I have to review it every time, which is kind of the downfall of it, which is why I never say we're going to lean into people's backstories on the West Marches. If it aligns, and I can pull something though, I do try because I think that makes it more engaging for the players. In this case, I knew that one of our players was playing a druid named Elle, who kind of is like a veterinarian, right? So she really cares about animals. I tried to lean into that because this map already had some cages on it. And I was like, this would be perfect if I put some animals in a cage on this map, then they might want to go free them, just like something to cause chaos on the map. So I added that as well. Not to mention, before even the first session, they had we have an RP channel on our Discord. And in there, they decided as a group to kind of start collaborating about how they would do this recon mission. In those talks, at one point, they did talk about creatures they might encounter on the way because they didn't know what they were going to run into. And in those messages, they actually mentioned seeing a bunch of wolves in the forest around there. There's also a couple other types of animals. I said, well, maybe it's the dire wolves or a pack of wolves that is currently being held as sacrifices to the beastie in the water to keep the beastie from eating the goblins, which doesn't necessarily work because it's a beast. It does what it wants. That's how I kind of like tied all of that in and where the idea kind of came from. That was kind of just the Foundry prep, right? For the actual like beating the anxiety part of the prep. So the part where I think I spend the most time was actually me coming up with solutions to the problem I'm presenting, right? So anytime I offer my players a puzzle or a complicated situation or anything like that, I try to develop 3 ways or solutions that they could solve this. As I have found, like if I prep those 3 things, I pretty much have enough to pull from. Even if they don't do one of those 3 things and they do something slightly different, I'll have enough information and understanding of how the players on the scene are going to move and react to the players' interaction that I can improvise better. Now, generally, I flesh out 3, but I actually brainstorm a lot more options or outcomes. So I'll probably jump to the obsidian here because I have just a list of different options that I thought could happen. But again, I narrowed it down to 3 and really fleshed those 3 out. And here's the 3 that I fleshed out. So the first one, of course, being the free the animals one. I felt like this one would be the most likely to occur. And I knew that either they would try to free the animals and the animals would come to their aid, cause chaos, that kind of thing. or the animals it might just be like a side objective that Elle would try to do that. No matter what happens with this Free the Animals one, I could only really envision massive amounts of conflict in some form or another. So if combat breaks out, which is always a possibility, what are my enemies going to do, right? So I figured it would have to be in waves. One, that saves me as a GM a little bit of time. Two, it just kind of makes things feel more dynamic as well. Not everybody's going to be aware immediately of the enemy being in the camp. So having waves of enemies makes it feel like it's a real place. And so from the get-go, I knew since I had so many enemies, I would have to do waves of enemies. I did not go to the nitty-gritty of deciding who was coming at what wave. That all was just improvised. But knowing that I had that plan of there's going to be waves of enemies really helped. Of course, after they cause chaos, then they would have free roam to explore everything and really get a lot more information on the artifact and temple situation that the hobgoblins were looking into. Whew. My buddy. Option 2, of course, was going to be just sneaking in and getting the info. This is the whole premise of the entire mission, was just recon and sabotage. And so this one had a chance of happening just because there's only one druid in the group who would have gone all out to save those wolves. But I could see that the quest requester kind of pulling her down off of that pedestal and just being like, we are here for one goal. If we can save them, yeah, we'll try to do that, but we should just sneak in and sabotage and do what we're here to do first. And so I could see that kind of negotiation happening between the players. I felt it was less likely just because of the type of character that the druid was. She seemed very strong-willed. And so I felt like if the player was playing their character in that strong-willed manner, then it was less likely to happen, but it was still an outcome. This made me prep all of the information they would find if they snuck in, right? So if they just were sneaking in, I didn't think any of them knew Goblin, but I did know that some of them could comprehend languages, that kind of thing. So I did decide that they would be speaking in Goblin, which would have made it probably a little bit more difficult. But regardless of whether or not you spoke Goblin, you would be able to get the sense that the goblins are unhappy. I planned on having them witness a boat of goblins going out onto the water and getting eaten, and some of the goblins seeming scared. I also had hobgoblins here who were kind of in charge and mistreating the goblins around the camp. So there's a clear delineation between, ranks here that they could also kind of gather. They already kind of are aware that there's some sort of artifact in the temple in the lake. And they gained that from last session after they surprised me and actually captured and questioned a goblin. So they already had that information, but I was going to remind them because it had been a few weeks. And also it's just good to reiterate, have multiple ways to find the same information, maybe offering a little bit more detail, etc. Other things they probably could have found out about other outposts that the goblins have, things like that. Now, the third option that I prepped, which I wanted to happen most, but knew it was the least likely to happen, was either some sort of disguise or negotiation tactic. So in my mind, they already gathered that the goblins are unhappy and the goblins are looking for an artifact in the lake. So I knew it could be an option that the players ended up diving into the lake, getting the artifact for the goblins and offering it as a peace treaty of sorts to get them either on our side or to get them to at least leave Honor's Reach alone. They already knew that the mistress was unhappy with the goblins, so there was enough information for this to happen. And I kind of liked this one more, this approach better, but I also felt like it was least likely just because of the way the group was talking and had RP'd in the past. So I kind of knew this one wouldn't happen, even if I loved this idea the most. This, of course, is what led me to preparing the entire underwater temple just in cases, because if they ended up doing that, I would need a map, which I had to make because there was nothing out there that really fit my needs and fit the vision I was looking for. So I did make a map for it. And then I also put a stat block together and some other things in that temple. So that by itself took pretty much half of my prep time. And of course, I didn't use it. Again, I'm an anxious GM, so I over prep a lot. However, because this is a West Marches, now they have this temple rumor, and I highly predict that some of these players will request to go diving into that temple. So it's already prepped, it's already ready. It'll be like super easy to just get on the schedule and get going in a one shot, not a two-parter like this one was. And so there's no regrets there. Like, even though I over prepped, I also knew it would become relevant later. So what actually happened? So one thing I liked, which has a lot to do with my particular group and our West Marches, is we actually have, again, a role-playing channel where players can go and talk in character to other players. They can strategize, they can meet other players, they can do research or that kind of thing and ask a GM about certain things that happened in their session. It's kind of to supplement anything that we really can't get to at the table, since we do have to try to keep these to one session so that anybody can jump in and go. And so that gives them another place to recap that kind of stuff. In this particular case, they actually RP'd their long rest in the chat, which we could have just hand waved and not done at all, right? But I really liked that they decided to do this because it gave them a chance to learn more about the environment around the camp, a little bit more information on the artifact and the beastie that is in the lake, a little bit more intrigue about the corrupted water, as well as gave the players a chance to really play their characters and like lean into some of their backstories and secrets, which is always super nice to see. And it also got them back into the mindset of these characters after what was, I think, almost a month break, I think. So they recapped like what they had done last time and really started to strategize approaching this goblin base. Nothing major, but that was like a really great way of kind of bringing the whole team back into the mindset of this particular mission. The game itself was about 4.5 to 5 hours, which is much longer, not much longer, but longer than I typically do. I try to cut everything off at 4 hours, but you'll understand in a minute here. We were literally on just the one map pretty much the whole time. Like, they started on the Watchful Stones map, but then made it to the camp, to the stronghold. An hour and a half of that time was just planning, and then the rest of it was pretty much combat. So they first used an arcane eye and to kind of scan they got a sense of the unrest, even if they couldn't understand, you can't hear with an eye, surprise. So, but they could still see there was unrest among the goblins. They could see the beastie in the water that attacked the goblins. They actually I shared a picture of that creature with them, so they really got a good look at that. They clocked all the buildings, especially the abandoned building, again, that had that extra lore in it, as well as the supply building, the multiple tents, the number of goblins. Like, they got a lot of just basic information from the arcane eye. They could have probably left, which is also, oh, I didn't mention this, but I did prep return trip hex crawling stuff in case they just looked around and then left, which they could have done, but I kind of knew they wouldn't. Essentially, I just prepped a roll table of events, knew they had like 4 or 5 days trek back, and if they did that, then I would roll on this table and those would be the encounters. I typically have an encounter thing like this. I need to get better at it, and we can talk about that at the end. But yeah, so they clocked all the buildings. They also saw hobgoblins bossing around goblins, you know, so things are just a little bit shaky there. And then of course they went to just like execute the plan, which their plan was to drop these beans from their magic bean bag that they found last session across camp and hope for chaos. and unfortunately their hopes and prayers were not answered and it was minimal chaos across camp, but Els still wanted to save those wolves, and so it ended up just being a big battle, as I kind of predicted. I'll send a screenshot too because there were so many enemies in this thing. If you like what you're watching, consider supporting me on Patreon, the best way to support creators on YouTube. You can get behind the scenes, plus you can get ad-free versions of my videos. Also, live streams, there's shop discounts, hopefully some paper products coming out, definitely a magazine in the works. There's lots of stuff there. Link in the description. Let's talk about what I could have done better. So I'm not giving you the play-by-play of the battle or anything, but one thing I thought of was I probably could have used minion rules in this case. If you're not aware of like minion rules, one, I think there's a book by MCDM, Flea Mortals, I think, goes into it. I don't actually have this book. I really need to buy the book, but I don't have it. And it kind of talks about it, but he has videos on it as well about how you kind of use minions, like groups of enemies in a certain way. Draw Steel, their own like tabletop game, also does this. And so I definitely could have used minion rules and made combat easier on myself. I did not. And so the Foundry turn economy was very rough. The waves of enemies did help. And I will say I'm pretty proud of myself because most of the time when a combat gets that massive and there's so many enemies, I get a little overwhelmed. I forget different like actions that my enemies can do and forget their motivations. And I think I handled it pretty well. I think part of this was just, it's mostly goblins. I've played or run several sessions with just these goblins before. And so having it like that really, I already had a good sense of these monsters. So I think that's why it went better than normal. I'm not sure. I did knock 2 characters unconscious, which if you watch my other one, you know it's always a goal of mine to keep the stakes high and at least knock some unconscious. And I knocked 2 unconscious. So good on me. But I will say I had the goblins start retreating. They made some like intimidation checks. They did have certain things that were happening and I started making them retreat. But I think I did it too early. And part of that was, I think that they wouldn't have started to leave until the Hobgoblin boss was completely killed. That did end up happening anyway, and so it ended up being fine. I think the reason I started to push for the little goblins to retreat so soon was because one, we were getting closer to that 4-hour mark. And like I said, I like to try to cut things at 4 hours, but I didn't want to, you can't end a battle this big in the middle. And of course, the other thing was I was afraid of a TPK and I'm always afraid of a TPK. Honestly, I think I just need to kind of like break the seal and have a TPK happen just so that I realize it's not as bad and I can fix it. But that fear of having a TPK, especially when I knocked 2 enemies down or 2 characters down, kind of overtook everything. And that made me have the goblins start to retreat. However, I did make them roll for it because I was like, well, they can see that the players are, you know, some of them are unconscious, but some of them are really strong. And like for instance, Claudio was kicking butt the whole time. And every time he approached a goblin, it died. So like on the one hand, they saw 2 down, but there was also now wolves on the field. There's this maniac paladin on the loose. There was this crazy wizard who was saying that more reinforcements were on the way. And the only voice telling them to stay was that hobgoblin commander. So in my head, it still made logical sense that they would be hesitant. So that's why I made them roll. So kind of let the dice decide that one for me a little bit, which I'm not unhappy about, but I do think I could have waited maybe 1 more round until that boss died and then just had them all retreat regardless. And of course, the final thing is we spent way too much time on planning. This happens all the time. I don't know how to kind of prevent that kind of thing. I need to learn how to push that planning forward to keep people on track, to keep them from planning the entire session. And literally an hour and a half. That's over almost a half of my session. You know, I mean, if I was doing a 4-hour session, that's almost half of my session just devoted to planning. And then those plans never work out. So I need to be able to keep my players on track more, push them to make a decision, just start doing things based on what they are, or calling for roles based on what they are proposing, that kind of thing. I think I gave just too much time for the planning. And I think that would have helped me in that combat. It would make me feel like I had a little bit more time, and then the goblins could have retreated at a more appropriate time, that kind of thing. But for what happened, the feedback from the players was actually really positive. They said the pacing was a little bit off. No, like some thought the whole thing was great, but the pacing was a little bit off, and the ratio was obviously off because, you know, the RP to combat kind of non-existent there. There was really just combat for the whole thing. But they did get that RP piece in the roleplay channel beforehand, as well as they got it in kind of that first session more often. That said, they were all super excited about the combat, even though it was massive, which I was extremely surprised about. I think the putting the enemies in waves and making it feel like the camp was dynamic, I think that actually kept all the players super engaged, which was crazy to me, because usually what happens with combat in like my Drakenheim game, even this last weekend, a couple players were pretty bored with the combat. And that's normally what happens because combat in D&D 5e just takes forever. They were all like super engaged. They were ready with their turns. They kept making comments on how crazy it was that I was managing all those enemies, and they're right, it was crazy. But I think that really was a surprise for me, and I really think it was all led down to me doing those waves of enemies and also having some goblins that had different skills. So I did have some not so conventional goblins that kind of changed up, even if they have been playing for a long time, changed up how you interact with goblins. So the goblins are routed. There's obviously another quest that the players, are a couple good quests, honestly. There were some rumors in that first part as well that the players can request moving forward. So overall, I felt like this session was great. If you want to watch the first session or the second session, you should go do that on my Patreon right now for free. If these kinds of games are something that you're super interested in, I have a whole West Marches server free to join and play. So feel free to go check that out as well. I'll leave links below. It's just on my Discord server. And please give me more feedback on this. I tried to make it shorter. It still looks like 35 minutes. It does take a while to prep, but hopefully this gives you a sense of all the main elements that I prepped for this, and I will see you guys in the next one. Oh, please give me feedback on this video. Let me know if this formatting is better, if there's stuff you want me to dive more into, that kind of thing. I'm always looking for feedback, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!